Conor Tomlinson, political commentator with Young Voices UK, joins us. A very good morning to you.
Good morning, Simon. Good morning, Rosie.
So, Christmas. Do you think that things will go ahead pretty much as normal, or are we entering a rather uncertain phase?
Well, I think we all breathed a sigh of relief when Boris didn't decide to lock us down overnight. I'm personally of the persuasion, as was discussed, I think, on immediately after on one of GB News panel shows, the conference was held. I think Boris is using this move purely as a political ploy, when a week before Christmas he'll come out and say, oh, we don't need to lock down, breathe a sigh of relief, enjoy your Christmas, it's much better than last year, and he'll be hopefully seeing a rise in the polls, a bit of a political hero. I don't think we're going to be locked down again, and I think it's mainly not because they don't believe it's necessary in a lot of sages' mind, because a lot of them have been going on the BBC and advising it. I think it's because, as Chris Whitty's headline came out the other day, even though he said it was misinterpreted, I think it was factual when he said British public won't put up with it anymore. We don't particularly see these restrictions as necessary. They didn't seem to work the first 3 times, and I don't think any of us want a 4th one.
I mean, we're going to be living in a more restricted world in England, that is, from tomorrow, 4 o'clock in the morning. If you come into contact with someone who then tests positive with that variant, that's 10 days isolation for you, masks on in shops. Do you think the public will put up with this?
I think a lot of people will use the perfectly legitimate mask exemptions on the government's website to not need to wear disposable face masks. Also, I was very frustrated by the Metro's headline. I'm not shocked by it, but frustrated that they said it's not too much to mask. Well, 53 million disposable masks sent to landfill every day, with longer life cycles in a plastic bag, take about 450 years to break down. Lots of them are manufactured in China in sweatshops, which is a disastrous thing to contemplate. So there is an actual cost to these sort of face mask policies, and they don't seem to have done an awful lot, and they don't seem to be, blocking things like vaccine-resistant variants. So a lot of these restrictions seem to be very performative versus actually doing anything. And I think the British public, a lot of people will just go, I'm not particularly fussed by this new variant. I'm not particularly fussed by wearing a mask. I'll just go about my daily business, and I'm not that worried by COVID.
You've got to have some sympathy with the government, because they're damned if they do, damned if they don't to some extent. And the one thing that all of them were saying on that podium the other day was we need a bit of time to work out what it is that Omicron actually means. You've got the doctor who discovered in South Africa saying the effects at the moment seem extremely mild, and there is this risk that we're just overreacting.
I agree. I think the temporary travel ban, the red list expansion with 10 countries is completely understandable. I understand the South African president was a bit hesitant and said it was unjust, but for a temporary negotiation, I can understand that. But to impose restrictions on us again, especially when the doctors themselves are saying, hey, this is much a hubbub about nothing, doesn't seem, particularly with the costs involved in masks and the fines associated with it, if you're seen to be not wearing them with a legitimate reason, even though there are a lot of legitimate reasons to claim exemption on the website. I think these are, again, a massive overreach, even in any direction. Short of the full lockdown, I don't think is particularly justified, and I agree with you. It seems like an overreaction.
Well, secondary schools are going to look a little bit different as of tomorrow as well, with masks being told to wear in, busy spaces. To some extent, we know that for the next few months, there's just going to be this period of uncertainty. Rules come in, they come out. We've just kind of got to play ball and get on with it, don't we?
Well, I don't agree with that, especially because children are completely not at risk from COVID. I mean, the death statistics are astoundingly low. Herd immunity has pretty much been reached at that point. And if you have natural immunity, it's much better even than vaccination. Also, the disturbing thing is in the revealed preferences of the teacher awards last night that Nadhim Zahawi chaired, nobody, not the teachers, not the former vaccine, now education minister, were wearing masks. So I would say it sort of reveals that, well, they don't seem to be thinking it's a necessity, so why are they imposing them on the kids?
Let's move on. The migrant crisis continues. The diplomatic, well, it was a spat. It's now clearly a huge row between Britain and France. Just seems to be escalating.
Yes, I was on France 24 last week, and there seems to be a lot of blaming on both sides. They were willing to admit that Macron is using this as a political cudgel to beat his opposition and us with, especially because he went in and ordered the police to break up the migrant camps, the squatting ones like the ones in Calais that were a bit more inland, but they had no path for recourse to actually send the migrants home or to send them to a safe country where they could seek asylum for those that were legitimate asylum seekers. So it's a bit of a strange one for the French to then turn around and say, oh, you aren't serious, Britain aren't serious about coming to the table, when they disinvited Priti Patel, and they themselves haven't put in any solid policies to ameliorate the crisis in place.
Yeah, the difficulty is they didn't like the approach that the UK government took. Do you think, actually, Boris Johnson, Priti Patel want to get this sorted, or are they just using it for political capital as well?
I'd say if they were trying to use it for political capital, it's an exercise in shooting themselves in the foot. I'm in Sidcup at the moment, and we've got a by-election on Thursday. And one of the main doorstep issues is actually the failure of the politicians to deal with the migrant crisis in the neighbouring county of Kent. It's pretty embarrassing, honestly, that Boris and Priti continue to be plagued by this issue, despite their speeches at the Tory Party conference. Priti Patel did say at the speech I sat in on when I went, the one I was sober enough to remember, where she said, "Oh, I'm going to cut the head off the snake of human trafficking." Well, it appears that snake has become a bit of a hydra, because every time she tries to do something, a new head sprouts up and decides to bite her in the neck. I think currently, unless you're going to crack down on the obstinance in the civil service, as we saw with the former head of UK Border Force, as we've seen with the RNLI, being unwilling to carry out the return the boats to the outside the Channel order, you're going to continue getting this issue. And it's not necessarily a lack of political will or fiery rhetoric, but just of effective policy being put in place.
Connor, thank you very much for joining us. Connor Tomlinson, political commentator with Young Voices. Appreciate your time.